All right, so we've finished talking about Darwin's theory of natural selection, and today we're going to focus on evidence of evolution. What kinds of things give us evidence that evolution has happened and is happening? So our first piece of evidence would be fossils. Fossils are probably our best evidence. It's what you're most familiar with of how we study evolution. So this is the imprints or remains of organisms from the past. And it tells us a lot. It tells us about species, for example, that are extinct. How do we know that we're dinosaurs? Because we found their bones. That's the only way we know. They're not walking around today, so we can't see them. We also can put together sort of a historical documentation of when organisms were around based on the fossil record. For example, in sedimentary rock, which is rock that builds up in layers, like you can see in this picture down here on the left, we know that the newer layers are going to be up higher than the older layers. So if we find shells or bones or whatever, and they're in deeper layers, we know they're older. And so we can learn a lot about when organisms lived based on the locations of their fossils. And this is showing like what they're talking about, how things build up, these layers build up over time. And so it kind of gives us some documentation of when, historically, some of these fossils came about. And this can link, Darwin saw this as well. I told you with the Galapagos tortoises, he saw fossils of tortoises in the cliff sides in the Galapagos Islands, and that gave him information about how the tortoises used to look compared to the tortoises that were existing on the Galapagos Islands at the time. All right, so a really cool, interesting example of this is with whales. So whales actually have these hip bones that they don't use, and there was a lot of question about whether whales actually evolved from an ancestor that lived on land. And we've actually discovered a lot of relationships between whales and hippopotamuses as well, and the idea is that maybe they came from a hoofed animal, an ancestor, and that ancestor eventually branched off into these different organisms, but one of which became the whales. And in 2001, they actually discovered some specific ankle bones that sort of matched the evolutionary, what we see in the whales. So this is showing what we see in Pakicetus. I'm not sure if that's how you say it, but this would have been many years ago, and then over time we see that this leg sort of has evolved, and eventually we get to a point where the modern humpback whale has this pelvis and hind limb here on the left, you see, but it doesn't actually use it for anything. We're going to talk about what that is, but it's interesting. The fact that that's there kind of gives us evidence that it has an ancestral link to organisms that actually did have legs and feet and lived on land. So it's kind of interesting. This is showing the modern day horse and some of the fossils that were found that show how it came from an ancestor that actually had multiple toes, and over time it sort of lost these toes and ended up with the leg and the hoof that it has today. Keep in mind, by the way, this is really important, that an organism, we don't believe what Lamarck said. We don't think, oh, well, because it didn't use all its toes, it just stopped having toes. That doesn't work like that. It's more likely what would end up happening is through mutations that occurred, some of them were born with modifications in their toes, and that might have been a benefit of some kind. So therefore, that mutation, because it was beneficial, became more common. It got passed on to more of the offspring, and so over time, these mutations accumulated, and we end up with the horse of today. But keep that in mind, that it would rely on some chance and mutation for these traits to appear. It's not like, oh, well, because it needed hooves, it evolved hooves. Or because it didn't use its toes, well, they just eventually fell off. That it doesn't work like that. This would have to be because of mutations causing these new traits to appear, and then because this trait was beneficial, the trait then gets passed on genetically and becomes more common. So keep that in mind. Another thing that we study is geographical distribution. How are organisms distributed all over the world? If you know anything about Pangea, the idea that the continents used to be one gigantic continent, and as the continents became separated from each other, ancestral organisms would have also been separated from each other. And so a lot of these, the capybara and the muskrat and the beaver, we think they share a common ancestor. But over time, what happened is they became isolated in different areas. And each area had its own environment. And so the capybara, which is really big, it's the largest living rodent, the characteristics that it has would have come about by natural selection, some random chance, as well as mutations that led to something that was adapted for the area where the capybara lives. Whereas the muskrat would have gone through different changes. And so, for example, the capybara may have lost its tail, again, through mutations. Or the variations were there, long tails, flatter tails, shorter tails. But depending on where the organism ended up, this tail was favorable here, so the ones that had a tail more like this died out. This tail was favorable down here, so the ones that had tails more like this died out, etc. But it's a combination. It's very complex. And we're talking about, like I said, combinations of mutations bringing in new traits, the environment then deciding which traits are going to survive or not survive. Variations have to be there already, the sizes and the colors and the shapes of their feet and things like that. Some of those variations need to already be there. They don't appear because they're necessary. And then over many, many years, these changes occur in the populations. Here's another example. Again, these are flightless birds. And what we see is they are distributed all over the world, and we think they share a common ancestor. Again, maybe from the time when these were all connected. And as these diverged, the land masses, these populations became isolated. And what would have been a beneficial trait to have if you are located here in South America might have not been beneficial if you were over here in Australia. And so it might have been more favorable to be smaller in one area but larger in another, and the populations diverged from each other. It's called divergent evolution. Again, some of this would also involve mutations and random chance and things like that. Remember, adaptations are typically a compromise. So what might be a benefit, being taller, having strong legs, but the smaller wings, that's kind of a drawback. They can't fly. So they become good at one thing, but not quite as good at something else, but they become adapted to their specific environment. Okay. So another thing that we can study is what's called homologies. These are similar structures that have sort of come about, that they're basically structures that we see that are shared with common ancestors. That's sort of the general word for homology. It's a similarity that's coming from a common ancestor. But we're actually going to talk about a couple of specific ones. It can also be on a molecular level, molecular homologies. We actually see certain percentages of our DNA that can be the same. So one of the things that we'll look at is what are called homologous structures, specifically in bones. So interestingly, if you look at the human, the cat, the whale, and the bat, we all share homologous bone structures. Notice that in the human and the cat and the whale and the bat, even though we use our arms for different things, the flipper of the whale and the wing of the bat are used for swimming in water and then for flying in the bats, the same underlying bone structures there. The idea is maybe we share a common ancestor, and over time, through mutations and natural selection, each separate group adapted to their environment. So the fingers became, longer in the whales, but shorter in the human, or shorter than that in the cat. They became thinner in the bat. But those underlying bone structures, we see something like the humerus in all these organisms. They all have this same bone. It's just longer or shorter. So what makes more sense? Is it that we all came from different ancestors, but we all happen to evolve the same exact set of bones? Or that we share a common ancestor, and over time, some of those bones have become longer or shorter, or have disappeared, or have fused together. Again, this would require more than just natural selection. This would require mutations, some random chance, different things like that. but these are called homologous structures. Keep in mind, very important, a homologous structure does not necessarily perform the same function, but it has the same underlying bone structure that shows that we may share a common ancestor, that it ultimately came from an ancestor that had this same bone, and the bone has become modified over time. So it's not about what the job of the bone is, it's its source. Where did it come from? Another example of this is what are called vestigial structures. So vestigial structures are structures that do not have a function anymore. And we already talked about one. This would be in the whale. They have that vestigial structure. We believe that their ancestor used it, that they were a land organism. And now the whales don't need it anymore. But remember, we don't believe in Lamarck. We don't believe that just because they don't use this structure, it's going to disappear. It may stay there forever and not have a function. Examples in humans include our tailbone. We don't have a tail. We still have a tailbone. Our wisdom teeth, they don't seem to help us, right? But we still have them. They don't just go away because everybody gets them pulled out. The wings in flightless birds. Some people say our appendix, although they have discovered that there are some jobs that our appendix does do, something with, I think, immunity or something. But it is a connection between the small and large intestine, and some say it's kind of like a vestigial structure that maybe it used to be something more like a crop or gizzard, something like what birds use for grinding up or using something with their digestive tract, but it doesn't really have a use anymore. But it's still there. We don't lose it just because we don't use it. Another thing we can study is comparative embryology. So a lot of organisms share common stages of embryological development. A really interesting one is the fact that all vertebrate animals, fish, reptiles, birds, humans, we all have these gill pouches as an embryo. We also all have a post-anal tail. If you actually look at a sonogram of like a developing embryo of a human baby at just 6 or 8 weeks, you can actually see a tail. But it gets reabsorbed, so by the time you're born, you don't have a tail anymore. But by studying our embryology, the fact that we go through similar stages, that we all have these gill clefts. In us, they don't become gills. They actually become our glands, our salivary glands, our eustachian tube to our ears. But the fact that we all have these and we go through these similar steps in our embryology can be used as evidence of us sharing common ancestry. This is showing a human and a chick. And we both see how the human embryo actually does have a tail, but it goes away.